a lot of folks are probably in, and if we have a couple others join, we'll just admit as they jump on.
Me kick it off and
Yeah,
then
sure,
hand it
go.
over. Okay.
Yeah, if you want to,
Um,
that'd be fine.
okay. Good morning, everyone. We always appreciate you here. We've got a really light crew this round. I don't know if everyone's starting their holidays early or what, but we appreciate those of you that are here and hope the others who missed the meeting were able to watch it later. We want to talk to you today about some residential refinements that we're doing. This is really similar. If you saw the Transportation Planning and Development Committee meeting on Monday, you'll probably recognize the topics, but wanting to use this as an opportunity to go down a little layer, to be a little to talk more details with you all, because we'd like to start working on preparing the actual language and moving forward with text amendments as it relates to particularly a few of these topics. So again, thank you all for being here, and because we've got a small group, looks like I don't think we really need to be raising hands. We could just jump in and with commentary as you have it along the way. So thanks, and I'll turn it over to Dave. Turn it to you.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, excellent. Good morning, everybody. As Allison mentioned, we're going to talk about a couple of topics. Some we touched on the last time, some we presented out on Monday at TPD, and are looking to get a little bit of additional input and feedback and guidance from y'all on some of the more kind of nuanced parts of these topics. And just again get some of your input so we can start to craft some language around that, and see what kind of things we need to keep in mind as we put together some of the regulatory language that would be part of a text amendment to address some of those things. So if we could jump to the next slide, we'll dive right into it. So we had talked a little bit in the past, in the last, I think, session, and we've talked about it some other meetings we've held with, we had an affordable housing roundtable not too long ago. We broached this subject and we talked about it again on Monday at TPD, and that's the notion of creating some allowances for housing partnerships with places of worship or educational facilities. It is not an uncommon topic that's on the table for a lot of folks in the planning profession right now, just not just across the state, but nationally. We've seen a bit of a push for some of the churches and places of worship and education centers as well to look to provide some ways to get housing opportunities on their properties or on their sites, whether it be workforce or affordable or a little below market rate. And one of the things that we would like to consider for this, we had a rezoning approved back in October for a project that was on some church land that wanted to do some multifamily attached. That was a partnership with Dream Key. But we did want to explore some ways to maybe accommodate that through a by right scenario, to remove that barrier and expense of rezoning, make sure everybody kind of understands what the expectations and expected outcomes would be, so folks could be comfortable with a by right scenario. And so essentially, as you can see on the slide, it would include all dwelling types. Right now, we have it where we haven't worked multifamily stacked or essentially apartments into the mix yet. That is something we'll talk a little bit about when we get to the next slide. But it would be for your multifamily attached townhomes, duplexes, triplexes, single family detached. Those would all be potentially unlocked housing types that could be built on a property that would fall under these guidelines. And it would essentially be developed either under N2A or N2B. I think we need to kind of weigh some of the pros and cons. I know there are some slight differences between the two. So I think that's something we would need to consider, which district fits best, or does it need to be something that blends in between both or work in both. Again, this would be something we'd look to not require rezoning on, so that folks could do this again without that barrier, impediment, and cost of rezoning. But there are some questions that we need to really start to get some answers to, not just from this group, but for some other folks that are, in the industry and work on these types of projects, and have a little bit of familiarity with some of the different challenges and opportunities that they present. So if we could jump to the next slide, we'll get into some of the questions we'd like to pose to y'all today, which is essentially, how do we deal with eligibility for these projects? There's some examples where it's the date or establishment of ownership or date of existence. So they would all have to, let's say, be an existing or established place of worship or educational facility that existed, upon adoption or implementation date of the UDO. That's something we've used in the past for other kind of things where you want to tie an effective date, or a date that kind of triggers an allowance for something and it's tied to that UDO effective date. Uh, so that's one question that we want to try to sort through. How do we potentially ensure that we get some workforce and affordability outcomes from these projects? Not every project may not be done by a Dream Key or another entity that really that's their kind of focus area and their bread and butter. Uh, how do we create potential opportunities for more home ownership rather than these being rental scenarios? Uh, are there parcel size requirements that we need to keep in mind for these? And also, when we talked a little bit on the last slide about multifamily stacked or apartments, uh, do they work better under certain conditions, whether when the lot is maybe smaller and you still want to get units, but you don't really have the space to do a layout like you might see on the screen. We do have a lot of urban churches and urban schools where if they want to provide housing for residents or even for, let's say, school staff, how do we accommodate that? Is a multifamily stacked option under those kind of scenarios feasible? Does it make sense? Are there criteria we need to make sure that we adhere to ensure that they're not imposing too much of an impact on maybe adjacent lots? So those are really the questions that are in front of us that we need to get some input on so we can start to craft some language as to how we make this a reality, and essentially what it would be. It'd be something that would be under, let's say, maybe a prescribed condition. So you would go to the use table, you would see this is allowed, and then these are the criteria that you would have to meet to unlock this potential option. So uh, with that, I'm going to kind of start off with maybe that first question on eligibility. Is that date of establishment, or is it ownership, or is it, the couple things that you think about in this scenario is even, let's say, a place of worship might change ownership or change entities that own it. Is it more that the church itself had to be existing at a certain date, or is it the actual ownership of the property? That's one of the big questions I think we need to figure out. Because and I'll just be transparent about what we're concerned with is somebody buying, let's say, a vacant lot and creating a kind of a place of worship LLC, so to speak, where maybe that's not exactly, it's a new kind of facility that doesn't really have any background or history in the community, but somebody may do that just to create an opportunity to unlock this zoning allowance, but they really don't have any intention, or never really intended to become a place of worship. So there's things that we've got to keep in mind that are potential loopholes that we want to be aware of. So that's why that ownership and eligibility question is kind of a really critical one that we need to get some input from y'all on. So with that, I'll turn it over for any ideas that anyone might want to share on that topic.
So, Angela speaking. I do. I understand that. Is it possible that, like, let's say there's an actual church function or there's land that a church necessarily owned but hadn't built on it, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um, I think it could be like you're saying, like, what is the ownership first, but what is the sort of religious use before we go in and just say, okay, you can, to your point, I could see people doing the exact same thing. And so I think that does matter of if there's not a church facility on it, has it been owned by a church for
right.
a long, like how long has that ownership been there? And will the use just be for the, residential purpose now? Because then those questions I think should like foster the conversation.
Hmm.
Because I can think of a lot of churches in Charlotte who've been sitting on land for a long time and
Yeah.
have owned that and haven't developed that. And so the religious facility isn't on the vacant land, but it's been out there. And so I think that it could be how long they've had it could factor in too.
Yeah, and I think the other thing we want to keep in mind too is if it's, let's say it's a scenario like that where maybe a vacant land, or even if it's a piece of property that has a church on it, if they sell it to another, religious entity that's going to go in and continue the use, do we need to consider the existence of the facility before, let's say, the effective date of the UDO? That way we don't want to potentially, get hung up on if, let's say, one religious facility sells it to another and they just want to continue operation. I don't want that to be a deterrent as well. So it gets to be a little bit, like you said, nuanced, uh, and we don't want to really prevent things, but we also want to, be cognizant of the fact that there are some potential exploits in it that we need to, just be mindful of and try to write out if we can.
Hmm.
But the vacant land, I think, would be more of an ownership timeline, and maybe land that has the existing use on it would be, it has to have been a ongoing or use in operation upon the effective date of the UDO. That way, there's, you know, the only downside to that is if somebody comes in and builds a new facility 5 years, from now, and they want to do this, does that preclude them? But they always have a rezoning option. But those are just, again, the challenges with trying to get something like this out there on the ground. And we won't be able to solve for all of it. There's always going to be a situation that we probably can't, think through or haven't thought of when we put this together. But we want to try to be as thorough as we can on it.
Might I make a suggestion that because I'm not, I don't, I'm not certain that there's probably not anybody on this committee that's actually, maybe I'm wrong, been involved in some of these projects like this. Uh, would it be useful to try to reach out to church members who helped facilitate projects like this? Like I forget the name of the church, the Baptist church in Belmont that converted a bunch of their land for affordable housing back in 2018 when the
Hmm.
color law group was going around Charlotte. There was a woman who spoke who worked for Bank of America and was a member of that church and talked about how she helped get the financing going for that. And maybe with Mayfield Memorial Baptist Church over on Sugar Creek Road. Uh, I don't know if Dr. Weary is still the pastor there, but there may be some institutional knowledge that might be worth bringing into this forum to get that type of feedback of what works and what doesn't work. And the other thing is, I'm the furthest thing from a lawyer, but I imagine at some point there would be conversations with the city attorney on how to uh, create zoning code that doesn't violate the establishment clause of the Constitution. That would be just I'm all for this type of project, and so I'm not looking for ways to deter it. But that just seems like something that would be important to consider.
Yeah.
Maybe even as we're discussing it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
This
So
is
if
being
I
a
could just
forum.
jump in real quick,
Yeah, go ahead, Angela.
both of those projects, one of those projects was in my neighborhood
Hmm.
that Joseph just referenced. And I would say that most of these church partnerships aren't led by the churches, they're led by their development partner. And so as it relates to the the church in Belmont, that was Laurel Street Development. That was sort of the partner there. And then the other church in Hidden Valley was Dream Key as
Hmm.
as the builder. And so I think that they're the ones that the development partner are probably the ones who have the institutional knowledge. And I would probably say our UDO is, I think, made up of people as well that work in this kind of work. I think we're pretty diverse. But like I said, I'm just saying that I think that we do have people on here, but it may be, as Joseph, I think, is sort of hinting to, maybe we invite some of these development partners in a conversation about what we're proposing here. Some of
Yeah,
those,
yeah.
yeah.
And that's we certainly plan to continue the conversation with folks in the industry on this, and we've already had some early conversations with folks that were really uh, excited about this potential opportunity, and I know would be more than willing to give us some additional feedback and input. We certainly have that on our radar and plan on doing that. We just knew that this group, as Angela mentioned, does have some diverse backgrounds and different professional interests, and so I do think there's value in talking through it with this group, and then having those conversations with some of the development partners that work on these types of projects. We've already got that kind of pegged for conversations to come, but they certainly will have a lot of value in their input also. I think I saw Rob had his hand up.
Yeah, I got a couple things. What does the city want out of this? What's your goals?
Housing options, opportunities for these projects to move forward with probably less potential barriers to them, so they're a little bit more uh, easy to navigate for folks that may be trying to put these types of deals and efforts together. So I think those
Okay.
are the two. I think affordability is certainly something we would love to see as an outcome. We're certainly aware that we can't make those necessarily requirements on things unless they're part of incentivized or volunteer type options, but I think that second bullet of ensuring workforce and affordability outcomes and ownership
Right.
opportunities are three of the big things. We're limited in how much we can dictate that, but I'd say those are probably the three big goals and just additional supply. So I don't know, Allison, I saw you come off mute if
So
you want to add to
Yeah,
that.
I wanted to add too, and this wouldn't be from a planning lens, but maybe from a city lens, is recognizing that places of worship are an important part of the fabric of our community, and wanting to make sure that they remain viable. And I think this is a way in which I think churches have reached out to the city, saying that this is a way in which they can create some income for the church, and also be a really strong partner in bringing housing to the community and being part of that outcome. So just wanted to add that.
yeah, what I wonder is a way to make the litmus test for these things is does that LLC uh, have to be a nonprofit? Is that an easier way just to make sure this doesn't become like a shell game, for someone to come in and just kind of turn into a regular housing development. And then the second thing is, and Shannon, I don't know how you guys feel about this. If we're just restricting this to religious places or worship or anything based, attached to religion, does that get us in trouble? From just a like, well, you're giving this benefit just to nonprofits that are religious, where should it be all nonprofits?
I'll jump in on that. A lot of the other examples we've seen have been just strictly focused on independent institutions of higher education or religious institutions. So, I think there's, maybe some ability to consider other nonprofits, but that gets to be a little bit more of a challenge because, they can vary in terms of, what their I guess just what their kind of outcome and roles are in the community in general. The most of the legislation and language we've seen in other places is just focused on those two outcomes for higher education or schools and religious institutions. So, it's certainly something we'll continue to run through with our legal side and attorneys here on the city team. But I will just say that most of the other examples we've seen have just focused on those two outcomes and those two outcomes only. I haven't seen too many that open it up fully to other nonprofits because then you're getting into, hospital establishments, other places. And we talked about that initially, but I think the scope is easier to focus on those two. Maybe we open it up as we learn more about it, but that's just kind of where we figured would be a good starting point.
Yeah, I mean, I get, eating an elephant one bite at a time, but like the example you used is a hospital. It's like, wow, yeah. And in fact, we know Atrium is, hungry for affordable, housing for their staff. Especially around, the new tower going up and stuff like that. So I, you know, I get we want to be focused, but I mean, there's a lot of nonprofits out there that would probably look at this as well. Like, I mean, is Goodwill even associated with a religious institution? And how much land do they have? But
Yeah.
I guess we're getting off track. But I guess my main point is, as a litmus test for these things is, can we just say, well, that LLC for the residential, has to be nonprofit.
No, I think our main issue is who actually owns the land where the project is going to be done on. I don't know if we have a concern about the actual development side of it. If somebody wants to come in as a, let's say a Carlsland or, some other entity that's maybe not a nonprofit, but they want to partner with a church or a school, as long as that land that they want to develop is owned by those types of entities, then I think that's been the focus, not so much who does the project at the end of the day. It's where does the project germinate from in terms of ownership of the land itself.
Okay.
Could that question be solved in how it's zoned? Like, for example, I don't know how all churches are zoned, but I recently became familiar with the institutional campus zoning code. So could you not like maybe rezone if churches aren't necessarily in that, just do another like text amendment to the UDO that puts churches in the institutional campus category, and then add this type of whatever type of by use requirements into that institutional campus type of use.
As far as I know, churches are allowed in every district, and that's based on the RLUPA laws or religious laws that basically mandate that they'd be allowed anywhere. And I don't know if Laura or Kevin or Alan want to confirm that, but I think they're allowed in all districts.
What I was saying is like if they are, I don't know what their zoning code is, but if it's not institutional campus, right, then I guess you're saying, but you don't want every district to be an institutional campus. That's the problem.
Right. The churches can function in any district. I think what we would look at would be essentially this would be allowed in any of those districts, probably with the exception of industrial, because most of the other examples we've looked at, there are clauses that say this is available in all instances unless you're adjacent to industrially zoned land or in certain proximity to it. So this would be allowed in all the same districts that a place of worship would be, likely with the exception of industrial, but that's something we're still parsing out a little bit.
And Dave, I was going to say, we talked a little bit about some of those other users like the hospitals. They, we hope at some point have aligned zoning. And if they are, as Joseph was talking about, one of those campus districts, they likely would be able to have residential if it's formally affiliated.
Right.
So that's already baked into the UDO.
Yeah.
This would just be adding to it.
Thanks, Laura. I think Nate's had his hand up for a little while, and I see Mike Sullivan and Meg, so we'll go with Nate, Mike, and Meg after that. Go ahead, Nate. Well, did we lose Nate? We might have lost Nate. So, Mike, we will kick it over to you till he jumps back on.
Sorry.
Oh, there's Nate.
I'll try to keep it short. I know you probably have a lot to get through. First question, I think it would be important to not do ownership and do some sort of vested creation of a place of worship, because when there's a development partner, it involves an ownership transition. So I would try to go with the establishment date, would be my thought, Dave.
Yeah.
And overall, I guess my comment would be these types of facilities have great benefit to the community. Like Allison mentioned, they also, their greatest asset, unfortunately, for a lot of them is their land.
It's their land. Yep.
And they might use that in different ways in the community if they were able to leverage that land. It might not just be affordable housing on their site. So I don't know why we're limiting it to just workforce affordable on site.
Yeah, and I'll just to clarify, we're not. It would be, it could be market rate. I think what we're trying to work through is, are there
Thank you.
ways that we can ensure that we do maybe get some of those outcomes? I've seen some requirements in legislation in other places where they do require it to be 100% affordable at different rates. I don't think that's something, that we can necessarily do given our limitations from a legislative side. But I think we certainly realize that we'd like to see that outcome, and are there ways we can maybe bake that in? But at the end of the day, we know that we can't require that, so they would have to be built at some market rate. So we're not looking to limit it just to that, but we're trying to figure out ways that we could possibly bake that outcome in.
Maybe higher density with multifamily stacked is allowed if affordability occurs on site, would be
Okay.
one to promote it. But thank you.
Yeah, no problem. That's good feedback. Thanks, Nate. Mike Sullivan.
Yeah, no, thank you. I have a couple of questions. Obviously, I'm on here as a East Side resident, but I also do commercial real estate, and I've done some work with churches. A lot of times, as we mentioned, their attribute or their greatest resource is their land. They have huge parking lots, and my questions have to do with three things. One is a property I'm working on right now, Providence Baptist. It has all kinds of zoning, because they would have different requirements for different uses on different buildings. So I wonder how we would address multiple zonings on those. Would we give the by right to all of those? Because some of them are in parts of their campuses that are, it would intrude into the fabric of the rest of the community. And also as far as parking would go, it might put some pressure on them. Also this, a lot of them have huge parking lots. Would that interfere with the parking requirements for the sanctuary? Because I know the UDO wanted to address a lot of those, but not only from a requirement for use, but also for just the convenience of the people who attend the sanctuary. And third is this, I know at St. Paul and some of the others, the sanctuary was staying, others they're not. I think you can get a lot of pushback from entities that may see a church that is their numbers are dropping and they may sell, but it would really change the dynamic of a neighborhood, some of the older ones. So I guess those are my 3 points, that more concerns than anything else. But those would be ones that I would think that would have to be addressed, especially if you just want to give a by right. What are you giving that to? The overall use, the ownership, or the zoning itself?
Right. I think the challenge of, let's say, like a multi-zone property like you'd mentioned, or really any area of the site, the project area, like the picture we have here on the slide, that area, that's kind of the single family attached product that's there on the right side of that image. If that came in under, let's say, this potential text amendment, that area would be treated as N2A. That development for that project boundary would be treated with the N2A requirements. The rest of the site would the site itself would remain zoned as is. The zoning actually doesn't change. It would essentially allow the project area that this would take place in to do a project under those standards, so long as they meet the prescribed conditions that we would put in place for, like we'd mentioned earlier, ownership or a state of establishment, those types of things. So it's a little bit, where you, like I said, carve that project area out. The zoning of the property itself doesn't change. Just the project area gets treated with that zoning district. So hopefully that makes some sense.
It does, but I still think we still have some of the issues that are going to come up. The second one is about the parking for the use. And also, on this particular one, you have a carve out for the church. Would that be what you would be looking for as opposed to something that happened to some of the other churches that were sold and are no more. They're now huge housing projects.
In some ways, this would be the most desirable outcome. As far as parking goes, we would need to make sure that everybody's parking requirements are still met. We may create some, if there's a percent reduction we could do, administratively with one of these projects, maybe we have to consider that if they have to lose some spaces to accommodate this. But we'd still want them to be, make sure they have enough parking for their use on the site. As far as if we would see these, like I said, the desired outcome would be kind of what we see on the screen, where the church remains, they build some housing to, provide that opportunity, and then they can maintain, their status and operation on the site. If it was a complete kind of tear down and just scrape the land and then put housing on it, I think that's something we've probably got to solve for and talk through a little bit. It wouldn't be much different if, let's say, you had a vacant tract that was owned by one of these entities that we're considering to develop that out. So I don't know if that's something we would require. I don't necessarily want to make it like go into an accessory use kind of thing, because then if the church does go away, then you deal with potential nonconformity, which is a challenge. So yeah, I don't think it would be restricted to the entirety of the site. I think we'd like to see both coexist, but I do think we probably need to go through that scenario in our heads of what if somebody wanted to come in, like I remember one church off of Briar Creek in the Plaza or Commonwealth neighborhood completely, went away and they built townhomes there. So, would that be something we would support through this type of amendment? I think that's a good question. And frankly, I don't know if we've talked through that scenario fully. So thank you for putting that on our radar again. I think Meg.
Okay, just three things real quick. I think definitely be really intentional with the language place of worship versus religious institution, because religious institution is much broader. Second, the IRS doesn't have any really tight definition of a place of worship, but I did put in the chat some guidelines that they use to determine if a place of worship is genuinely that. So we could, don't have to reinvent the wheel. It could start from that. And then the final one is just, it's more of a thought that is just coming to my mind as we think about potential unintended consequences and impacts of gentrification. There may be a need for some peer education from churches that are going through this process, especially to congregations that are in areas that land is valuable, but maybe the size of the congregation is declining, just to avoid any sort of, predatory type of development coming in there. And then, the writings on the wall, the church population is declining and eventually will go away. And this could potentially speed that up. So just something to think about.
Yeah,
but overall,
certainly.
I love the idea.
Great. Thanks, Meg. Those are great points for us to consider. Appreciate that. Douglas, how are you today?
I'm Groovy Dave here in the frozen tundra of Charlotte. Just living the cold life. When you go later in the list of folks, they cover all your points before you get to your time to talk. So I agree very much with Meg on the notion of being sensitive to where these where this process can take place. I believe that churches are in general in wonderful places where community is already been established, and it's nice for us to get that infill in those areas where many of these churches are located. I do believe that this will change significantly the dynamic of the market for churches. I bought a church in 1996, and it was difficult at that time to find a church because churches were full of people, and you couldn't find an empty building, and nobody wanted to move. Those are not things that people say about the church marketplace in 2024. And so what we would be doing is, in a lot of ways, turning the churches into a much more valuable property. So I just be cognizant of that. The litmus test of what makes a church, the church that I bought or represented in that purchase would probably blow up a lot of the discussion that we've had here. And we just need to be very careful of that. I think Roger mentioned earlier nonprofit, and I was like, not necessarily. that sort of thing, or even religious doesn't necessarily fall in there as well. So just be careful about that language.
Mhm.
Also agree with the notion of bringing in other institutional types of development. That the hospital is such a direct thing there. That notion of along Garden Terrace by where
Yeah,
Atrium
yeah,
is currently now,
yeah,
obviously used to be a place where nurses hung out. Kings Drive used to be a place that was full of nurses, and there will be health facilities all over town that could probably benefit from that.
yeah.
Final point is the sunset of this, because when this property does change hands, um, again, when I bought a church in 1996, we bought a previously existing church, which had been Forest Hills Presbyterian at the time. So, churches bought churches. I don't believe going forward, given the participation in churches as it is currently now, that we're going to have churches buying churches. We're going to have people buying properties that were formerly churches, should they get the benefit. Because if this is a change, quote unquote, in entitlement, is it in perpetuity? And will those folks, look at that as, oh yeah, I could buy the church now, and 10 years from now I can build on it and do
Mhm.
whatever, because it was a church when the rules said it was a church. So the long game,
Yeah,
what does that mean? Those are my
yeah.
comments.
Yeah, no, those are great points, and we did early on talk about hospitals and the Atrium campus there, and Dilworth certainly came up as a scenario where we could see this maybe working there as well. So I don't think we've completely ruled that out. It's good to hear some feedback from some folks on maybe some benefits uh, to a healthcare institution or an institutional use. So it's something we, can certainly continue to work through and see if that, has some feasible outcomes for us to bake into this as well. Uh, so that's great feedback for that. Thank you, Douglas. Uh, Angela, I think you had your hand up. And then I do want to talk real quick after this question about apartments versus just multifamily attached. So, but Angela, go ahead.
Yeah, so my thought, I just sort of had a thought. So once the land is, so we give this to the churches, religious institution, and once this land is developed out, does it matter like if it's a for sale product or if it's because I would think that if the church is sort of still holding the land, how does that translate into like tax base and things like that? And so does it matter if it's a sort of a rental project versus a for sale project?
Mm.
Is all of that sort of weighed in, or does it matter?
I mean, preferably, I think we'd like to try to get as many ownership opportunities as we can, but as we kind of mentioned earlier, that's just not something we have the ability to dictate from an outcome standpoint. But the question about, that taxation side of things, that does get a little bit tricky. That's something I think we'll have to just kind of talk through with legal on our side, and then reach out again to some other places that have incorporated some of this to see if that became an issue for them or not. I would think because they typically aren't the developer of the parcel, that it would be deeded or parceled off and maybe sold to the development team to do. So then that
So it's
taxation
no
side of
longer
things
sort of
kind of
owned.
right,
That's what
right.
I was
So
It's
thinking.
actually, so I've talked to a couple churches about this, and what the feedback that I've gotten is that they would like to retain ownership and use them as rentals, which is a little bit different than what we would probably like to see. But I think what the one of the things it's doing, it's creating a revenue stream for the church, and that's what they're needing to remain, you know, just for their own financial purposes. So that's only two churches that I've talked to, or two, churches that are either have or are considering doing something like that. That's the feedback I've gotten.
Thank you for that, because that's interesting, because
mhm.
I was sort of thinking initially of parceling off, and so that piece wouldn't be, but to the point of the folks who want to retain, that's interesting because typically the church land is non-taxable. So if they're holding on to it, I was just curious how that plays out in general.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know anything about taxes, so I can't.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good thing because it probably helps them keep the affordability side if they're trying to hold it, but it just made me sort of think about how that plays out outside of the zoning side.
Angela, for the churches that are located in more urban settings that may be on 4, 5 acres, that non-taxable thing doesn't become an issue. But then there are the churches in the burbs that are sitting on, 50, 80 acres. Not looking at you, Calvary, but there is an implication there of, how much tax revenue comes from developing out a significant portion of 80 acres worth of land.
Mm.
And just to piggyback on what Douglas is saying, I've been educating myself on suburban development, and just as most of you probably know, I feel like I'm one of the more novice people in the group. But from what I've learned, the further you get out in the suburbs, the more costly it is to, first of all, build out, and then second of all, when it comes time to like do maintenance on sewer lines, water lines, streets, and things like that. So it does have a lot of times the suburban growth is great on one hand, but it has implications on the back end for when it's time to do that kind of maintenance. I think that Palisades community in Southwest Charlotte that wishes they had been in Charlotte 20 years ago is a good example of that. And so I want to kind of piggyback on what Douglas said in agreement that that's something probably worth considering as much as you legally can in the requirements.
Yep, certainly that's a good input as well. And just the question on, and I think from a parcel size standpoint, I would venture that most in the group would probably say that that's not maybe something that would be a huge factor, just given the differentiation of, kind of context of churches we have. Some are really large land holdings or sit on a very large piece, but some are fairly small that might be in some of our older established neighborhoods. So if there's not a real concern about parcel size requirement, or if we feel that there's a real need to consider that as a kind of a restriction or a condition, I think that feeds into a little bit of the last bullet then about, do multifamily stack to make more sense on some of those smaller lots? If there is an acreage requirement, maybe that multifamily is only, something that unlocks if your parcel is less than, a certain size, an acre, 2 acres, or as Nate mentioned earlier, maybe the multifamily stacked is more of the incentive to allow more units to get an affordable outcome. So just curious to hear what folks may think. I know that the couple projects we've looked at on this slide and the one before were mainly focused on townhomes, multifamily attached, but we have heard some desire to open up that multifamily stacked. And, N2A and B typically allow that at about a 48-foot height, so it's not much different than your single family residential. So I don't think height would be a big issue, but if you wanted to get as many units as you can on a project, is that something that makes sense for us to consider and figure how we might be able to weave that into this?
I think it would be good to speak to, I mean, I would think, I haven't spoken to any, like the Mayfield Memorial Project, I guess there was, I don't know if there's a revenue goal in that, but I know that what they were presenting to the city council, because that's a multifamily stack.
And that was out on Sugar Creek, right?
On Sugar Creek Road.
Yeah, I remember that rezoning. Yep.
Yeah, so I think one of their goals, if I recall from the rezoning, was affordability, and I think if we're trying to, so my hunch is that's part of it for them. Even if money making, revenue stream is one of the goals. I think a lot of these churches are also trying to do something to make things more affordable. And speaking to Nate, the more units per acre you get, the more affordable it's going to be. And also to what Douglas is saying, the more efficient it's going to be, especially if it's not going to be something that is going to be a taxable parcel. You at least want to get the most bang for your buck on for it, so that at least there's some sort of offset that something, some kind of social benefit that offsets the loss.
Yeah, yeah. And
Capital
I
loss.
think the maybe benefit to multifamily stack, particularly in N2A and B, like I said, that 48 feet is generally the base height for those, which is consistent with a townhome. So, maybe that's the cap that it stays at to keep it, at least contextually appropriate, unless you're maybe somewhere that's not adjacent to some single family or something. But the other thing, if we think about it from a multifamily stacked standpoint, there could be some opportunities. We heard about parking earlier and concerns about some parking. Maybe there's some opportunity for a little bit more of shared parking in those scenarios where, some of the loss on maybe the church site itself could be absorbed and taken into account on the multifamily side, because they would typically have bigger parking areas than a multifamily attached project. So there could be some, kind of relationship between parking on a multifamily stacked versus, maybe the multifamily attached as well. So just kind of thinking out loud as we talk through it. I think, do I see another hand? Douglas, I think.
Yeah, Dave. As you were talking there, my mind went in the opposite direction. Related, but trying to get more units on that particular property or whatever size parcel we may be working with. Right, I'm a big fan of cottage court stuff.
Mhm.
And right now, cottage courts are limited to, is it 30 units in that
30
overlay?
units. Yep.
It, to me, looking at this from a community building point of view, let's blow that limit up. Allow them, if there's like a small size bonus or something like that, and I'm not sure
Mhm.
how that works. But I would be probably happier with having more small units in a cottage court that I think would build better community than a bunch of people in stacked townhomes or whatever who are going to walk out of their car and walk out of their place and walk to their car and never talk to one another.
Right.
So is it possible that we could also add as a provision or something, again, raise the number, let's say we get 40 instead of 30 on a parcel, or some kind of constraint related to the size of the units. I don't know if we can say, if they have a driveway that has 50% impermeable surface, we can give you more, blah blah blah, whatever incentive.
Right.
But again, if you see where I'm going, it's getting more units. I just didn't go
but
up.
It's creating a little bit more of a community outcome versus I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
And to me, that's the important thing about cramming more people into less space in the city, is to create more community, not necessarily to create more housing.
Yep.
But that's
Excellent
just
point. Okay. Other thoughts on that? Other thoughts on this topic in general? I think what the goal would be is to, this was really great feedback. It helps us kind of continue to get our thoughts together on it and compare some of the things we're hearing with, what we learned from other places that are trying to accommodate this as well. It's a fairly new, effort and something that the profession as a whole is starting to tackle a little bit more universally. So we should have some good reference points for us. But I think the goal would then be to create some good language that we, at least want to put in front of everybody to get some feedback on how we might have addressed and accommodated some of these things we've heard today, and whether or not we're close to get that into some type of amendment that we can then start moving forward. I will say there's a lot of, I think, favorable views on this from the folks we've talked to in the industry, and again, some council members we've kind of talked to about this. So there's definitely momentum behind it. I think, as with most of these types of things, the devil's going to be in the details, but I'm hoping that through these types of conversations, we can get as much of those details fleshed out and thought through and incorporated into a text amendment that we can try to address everything we can as best as we can. So that's the next step for us, would be to take all that, write some things up, and maybe propose a little bit more draft type language to y'all to get some feedback on. So that'll jump us into our next topic, Alan. I think next slide. And this is a fairly straightforward one, just really kind of surety on support for, this type of scenario, which is adaptive reuse of office buildings for residential. I know we all are probably aware of just the general challenges from an upfit standpoint that is related with these types of conversions. But our goal is to at least put the tools in the toolbox and let folks at least be able to know they can do that type of project without needing to go through any other, real lengthy process on an entitlement side. If you've got an existing office building that's vacant, you want to convert it to residential. Uh, these are the guidelines you would do it under, and it kind of let us get out of the way and let those other, details on building codes and upfit process kind of run, the course that they need to without the additional time or constraints of potentially a rezoning process. So, we talked a bit about potentially adding multifamily as a standalone use in our office districts. But the more we kind of think through that, or at least the more I've kind of thought through that, it seems, we have to think about it in the sense of place types. And our campus place types is where a lot of those zoning districts are, which were mapped out and done in a way to absorb and accommodate opportunities for employment for population that we expect to see in terms of growth over the next 20 years, now 16 years. So we don't necessarily want to lose out on uh, those potential employment opportunities. I know they're few and far between in terms of new office going up, but uh, without having some discretionary review of those through the rezoning process, which is the normal course, we felt like the adaptive reuse side may be the best kind of starting point for this. And, if the market just completely goes away and there's, just off the table for any kind of new employment opportunities, that we might need to rethink some of that. But for now, we're just kind of focused on adaptive reuse of those existing buildings. So I'd just be curious if anybody had any real burning concerns about that or anything that we may need to keep in mind or consider for that. Nate?
No, I think this is a great reaction with policy to make sure our city still kind of maneuvers through different economic times with different market cycles. I would say a lot of, and I'd be interested on Roger's thoughts. A lot of the convertible office buildings are towers with a very specific footprint that are already in urban zonings that allow multifamily.
Right.
And a majority, although a lot of the press is uptown vacancies, the really scary thing is the amount of suburban office buildings that are going empty that are not convertible.
Right.
And that cannot, that are in office class, that the amount of money to upfit it to a Class A space, it's cheaper to demolish it.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just ask the question, I think you kind of summarized it, David, where y'all are at, but an allowance to demolish an office building and build a residential building on that footprint.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
worse than a void of an empty office park with a bunch of surface parking around it in a place type, no matter what it is. As well.
Yeah, no, and that's actually a great point, Nate, and this is exactly why we have these calls. Is now that you mentioned that, is it a scenario? I know we do a lot of conversions of square footage from non-residential to residential in, let's say, some conditional plans. Is there, maybe a conversion scenario where if somebody did need to just knock the building down, that we provide some credit for the square footage that's there and convert that square footage into a calculable outcome for residential units?
Yeah, conversion neutral, I think.
Yeah. So that's something I think that maybe makes some sense, because you're right. It's not in some places it's just not feasible to upfit an office that's in a suburban location for residential. It would still keep us keeping things in check with vacant properties in some of those campus place types to make sure that we still can accommodate employment opportunities and things, and have some discretion through a rezoning process. But where it's existing, do we come up with some conversion rate to allow that to happen? And maybe that's an outcome we need to explore a little bit. think it's reasonable. I don't know what that number would be. So I think we might need to, if we go that route, we probably would need to reach out to some folks like yourself and others that work on those projects perhaps, and get an idea of what, a reasonable square footage would be for a conversion. But like you said, maybe it's just trip neutral or something to that effect. But that's definitely a scenario I think we could explore and try to come up with some ways to take care of that.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. From my standpoint, heading in the right direction, and totally agree with Nate. We're already looking at some suburban stuff in Raleigh to be scraped and converted. Yeah.
How are they dealing with it there? Are they dealing with it on a conversion side as well, or are they just allowing it as a new use?
Yeah. It's a new use.
Okay.
I don't, I'm not an office broker or any of those guys, but I don't see a huge shortage of suburban office anytime soon. When I say soon, I mean like 10 to 20 years. So yeah, I mean there's going to be more stuff that gets converted, and it's actually a good thing, from a traffic standpoint, to be honest. It's a lower trip count.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know, figuring out those conversion rates and kickers is probably a roundtable discussion,
Yeah, I think that's definitely going to get into the weeds a little bit with some folks that work on those types of projects in the industry, just to see, if it makes sense, and if there's a way to accommodate it, or if it's something that we really, need to be overly concerned with. I think like I said, our big challenge is just making sure that we maintain, because again, those place types are all mapped with numbers in mind to either accommodate new residential units and growth, to make sure we had enough spaces for job creation, make sure we could accommodate activity centers and all of that. So don't want to necessarily lose those to, just residential when they were slated for employment, but those things all shift and ebb and flow as well. So it's just making sure, again, as we mentioned earlier, just trying to maintain that balance of expected outcomes and market realities. All right, I think that gets us to the next slide, which I think goes over to Allison.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Last topic, I wanted to get some feedback about an idea that we've had regarding affordable housing. So we had a workshop in October. Some of y'all were there. It was really intended to be a very technical discussion about things that we're already doing now. Are they working? And then what are ideas that we may have going forward? Next slide. We talked about the fee in lieu. So for those that weren't there or haven't heard, that one's been pretty productive. We've had about $19 million committed since 2019. But that's really been a tool that is for high-rise projects. And some of the feedback that we talked a lot about at that workshop was that we really need opportunities for mid-rise affordable projects, because going up higher is not really an option. You switch construction types. And there are many projects that are not going to go into steel type construction. And so we need some other options. So we have the voluntary mixed income density bonus that's been used, I think maybe a couple times by Habitat. And we've since recently have changed that so that you can actually jump to zoning districts in most cases to be able to, if you have 50% affordable. So we're starting to see some activity with that. There's something in there that I'm still, I think I'm bugging Nate and Thomas Hopapura recently about this. Like, why isn't this something that is of interest? Because there is a horizontal density bonus. So recognizing again that height is not of interest. So if you were to reduce your open space and so create additional footprint area, if affordability is provided. So we haven't had anybody use that. And then we also have some relief from some ordinance requirements in there. It's fairly limited. We haven't really seen a lot of activity there. And so if you go to the next slide, what we really learned is that we need some more, really need some more education on what these incentives are. Again, more incentives for mid-rise construction. This was not a surprise for us to hear. We frequently hear that tree save, stormwater, public streets, and open space are the items that are most requested for relief for affordable projects. We did hear that the percent of units that we have, so like there's, in order to utilize some of these tools that we have, there's a certain amount of affordable units you have to provide in order to be able to unlock those incentives. And so we've gotten some feedback that those set aside percentages should be lower so that it makes it more viable. And then again, hearing about streamlining the approval process, which we've heard as well. Next slide. So this is the idea that I wanted to hear from, that I want to hear some feedback from y'all. And I'm particularly glad that Meg's on here because when I heard that Eric might not be able to attend, I was like, I really want to hear y'all's feedback on this too, because I know you've been really involved in our tree work in the past. So this is the idea that we use some city money, not money that we would get from fee and lieu, which goes to our tree canopy preservation program, use different dollars. We create a mitigation bank and we allow affordable housing projects to use that in lieu of their tree save requirements. And so we, give credit to them. This would give an affordable project about 15% of their site back for development. When we were purchasing the mitigation bank, we would really be leaning in on areas that are areas of low canopy. So it's kind of a win-win. Also, that we are making sure that we're maintaining canopy in areas that don't have it. And then we would also be able to use our canopy care fund to be able to plant the required trees on affordable sites. So this idea kind of came out of some discussions that we heard at the workshop about thinking a little bit more sort of community scale about these things. And so where can you maybe share resources? And so this is an idea in which we provide the tree save for you. It may not necessarily be in that location where the project is, but it is, being prioritized in areas that need canopy. And then, so we're not losing the tree save area. We're just providing it for you. And then also making sure that the trees are there because that is very important, but something that we could also provide. So wanted to hear your thoughts on that idea.
I think the idea of planting, trees, incorporating trees into sites. I mean, it's something that people aren't going to see for a generation, really get to experience and benefit from. But I think I participated in a recent forum, and one of the things that like it's lacking a lot is like good shade, like good places to go and be in nature and just separate yourself from, and it leads to better health outcomes. So I mean, so just to understand this, would this allow for like a density of like part of the site to be utilized for a density of trees? Like it would just be you cut down some trees and then do a replanting elsewhere to compensate for what you took down. Is that sort of what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that the planting requirements would remain the same because we want to make sure that tree canopy is an important part of the development. So we're just saying that we would be able to plant those trees for the affordable housing project. But I think the more critical piece of it is that you wouldn't have to retain 15% of your site for tree save, you would actually be able to develop that part of your site. So you're getting 15% of your site back that you can use to build more units. And so I think that's, I think we've just been hearing that the numbers don't work because you just need to be able to put more units on the site to actually be able to provide any kind of affordability. And so this is an idea of like, all right, we'll give you 15% of the site back.
Would this be effective like in the compact development and what was the other one? The
conservation
development. How would this affect those two text amendments?
We haven't really gotten into the details of that yet. I think this is really just kind of testing the general notion of the idea and seeing what people think about it. But I mean, potentially for any type of residential development.
Allison, this is Douglas. As you were explaining this, the notion came to me that what you were creating is a market for tree save credits, in which you all are the only person, or the city would be the only one that had the actual credits to exchange. Is it valid that that tree save credit market be expanded beyond just having the city be the only place? I'm a developer. I have a suburban site, tons of area that I cannot validly use and develop on, but it's heavily treed. Can I supply my tree save credits to an affordable developer at some rate, all right, whatever that may be, in order to, like carbon credits. Basically, that is exactly the same thing that came to mind. Do we create a tree save credit marketplace? And would that be more effective? I'm a believer in the market. You guys know this. I'm a free market guy. The government has no monopoly on the truth. So let's spread this to everybody in the market. Would it be more effective to get that into the marketplace and follow the same idea? I'm just throwing.
I've thought a lot about that. So people may not know, but my former life, I started off as a marine scientist, and my master's thesis involved tree mitigation banks. So I know a lot about them, and yes, and so I've picked a couple of affordable housing developers' brains on this topic, and Fred brought this same idea up. I think it would be interesting to explore. It might be the phase 2 part of it, just trying to kind of get the kinks out, being in a more simple sort of way. But I don't disagree with you that
let's dive head first into this sucker. Why why putz around?
Well, I think you could operationalize this pretty quickly from the city's perspective. I think working out the details of the mitigation bank and how you do that would probably take a little time. When I say phase 2, I don't mean like phase 2 like in year or 2 years from now. I'm saying I think we could do this really darn quickly.
Yeah.
And so Tim Porter's on the call too. So Tim, whenever you have thoughts, please don't be shy. But I don't disagree with you, but I do think that would be a layer of complexity that wouldn't be as fast as just
I'm just over here having these little brain farts all by myself. So
no. I mean, we've thought about it too.
Okay, good.
We've thought about it too.
Hey everyone, Tim Porter here. I would add that right now, conceptually, that is possible. We have offsite tree save as an option, and so it's from a shrewd, smart, landowner who is offering their tree save to other customers level to a full market scaled up thing. Very different realities there, but it's possible. It certainly is possible, and I think Allison mentioned we don't necessarily think we need a text amendment for this. We need more of the internal framework ready to go. I think what's really attractive from my perspective is that this is an opportunity to really help affordable housing development. It's cost reduction, the city can also be very strategic and intentional, sometimes surgical, in where this land in the bank is located. Because if you look at this map, we can target heat reduction, we can target low income, we can target low canopy. Strategically, this is an opportunity for us to really connect policy directly to the regulatory world immediately. And it conceptually, we're not looking to use existing tree safe payment in lieu dollars because that doesn't make sense. So it's also the city stepping up and taking a stronger approach to trying to find that balance, right? Balance is one of the key themes of the UDO, the balance between conservation, preservation, and housing. And so just a couple thoughts there, but it's something that is doable. And I think I agree with Allison. We could get this up and running fairly quickly from the city side.
Allison, can you briefly just like a quick more once over of the mechanics of how it will work again, like in terms of like which areas the red area, that's what I would need to know. The red area, that's where we would that's where there's plenty of canopy to be used for a mitigation in, say, the green area. And like
I just have that image there. That's some canopy mapping work that we've done recently, and it's a really great tool because it identifies areas that are suitable for adding additional canopy because they're low or there's
okay.
potential planting area. And so really just the point of that was that
so it would be vice versa,
acknowledging that we couldn't necessarily just buy tree mitigation banks next to projects. I mean, that's really not probably likely to happen, but that I think we could have a mutual benefit of helping the affordable housing projects and then also prioritizing bank purchases in areas that need canopy the most. Tim, I saw you came off.
Yeah, this would you said vice versa. So this would target areas where there's a need for canopy, where it's typically low in canopy or lacking in certain places. So I think this image is probably a snip from our canopy tool we have that is either low canopy areas or areas with high temperatures that only 9% of our canopy covers impervious land cover, which is something from a policy perspective we want to work on. So this is an opportunity to start doing that, to really be strategic in our land acquisition for conservation. A lot of times, and generally, land trusts and conservation entities are very opportunistic, and they have to be. Sometimes you can't find that perfect strategic property that fits all your mission criteria, but this is a situation where we could achieve that better than in many kind of standard situations where we are just opportunistic with what's listed, with what's available. This would really constrain us and focus us into areas where canopy is needed. And I think it tells a better story too. If you're providing this option for affordable housing development, and the narrative says we're providing this for these customers, but we're going to provide that canopy in the most needed areas across the city. It's a better story overall.
I mean, I guess the question that I would like to hear from or get an answer for is 15% of the site back for development. Does that move the needle? I mean, of course, it's not going to make it work for every single project out there, but does it move the needle for enough sites that we're getting more affordable housing? Like, is this a viable tool? I think is really what is the fundamental question.
I guess, Allison, this is Nate. So explain to me, does this move the needle for more affordable projects that you would typically see from the affordable developers here to now work and produce more affordable housing development? Is that the question?
Yes. Does this make more sites viable if you have if does 15%
I think it's
more developable area enough?
I think it's going to make a marginal deal a little bit better. But there's so many other variables with interest rates and other elements that are out of our control that it's going to, again, move the needle a little bit. How many more projects that creates, I'm not sure. I do have another idea on affordable once we're done with this one, but I think it will definitely help.
It helps. It's
It's
a single, not a home run.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair.
It's not going to, sometimes getting more density doesn't mean the project can move forward because whether it be land costs or overall construction costs or other infrastructure requirements, but it will definitely help.
And so to add something real quick, that last bullet on the slide, what's part of this in addition to tree save help is this idea where Canopy Care, that program, which is funded right now by heritage tree removal mitigation payments, there'd be also assistance provided to these projects for your street tree requirements, your parking lot requirement, any type of required tree planting that's not tree save. The city would also provide some level of assistance there as well for projects. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, and Allison, I'll answer it another way too. Like, if you bundle enough of these things together, what you want to do is create a new marketplace where it's enticing for more, not our current affordable housing developers, but even more affordable housing developers to enter Charlotte because it's a viable business plan for them. We've got a great stable of affordable housing developers here, but we almost need to create a new marketplace by bundling enough of these ideas together where we have more people come into the market. So I think that this is like a huge step, but if we can get to that point, I think then that's where it's really going to snowball.
Well, while you've got the mic, what's your other idea?
So it was what you were texting me about. So the biggest issue, and Roger can jump in for our clients, a market rate client to do on-site affordable is not that gives him a better financial return or more density. It's that it just complicates his underwriting, lending, and exit strategy by having affordable housing as part of his project. I'm not saying I agree with that or not. I'm just saying that's what we hear a lot is even if it becomes, to Roger's point, a home run financially for them to do affordable with more density, they'd rather take the single because it's a sure thing. One thing we have seen on a few conditional rezonings, most notably Valentine and River District, is doing a land set aside for affordable housing is much more enticing, where if somebody has a 20-acre site and they're setting aside 2 acres for a different group to come in and execute an affordable housing project, that's much cleaner for a typical developer to do, and probably much more enticing if there was incentives for more density or upzoning. So I don't think we have that option right now, but just something I would throw out there is another alternative where you could get more market rate projects to include affordable in a different way. Did that make sense?
Yeah, so essentially, I guess you allow more density on the site if there is a required set aside for affordable housing, and then I guess you would then put some type of deed restriction
Land.
on the set aside piece for it can only be developed for affordable or something along those lines. Is that what you're saying?
Valentine, like MDA or the River District.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, we already have that in the affordability, right? It's already in the manual for the height, just not for the horizontal. So we'll just be
Right.
adding it for the horizontal. Like basically to simplify it, you could add it for the horizontal if we
Right.
were all on board with that versus having to cut, like it would just be that change.
But
Just
I
a
think what Nate, what you're saying is that the developer wouldn't be involved in the set aside part.
Right.
It's actually given to the city, I think, in Ballantyne,
Okay. Okay. Okay.
to the city in Ballantyne.
Hmm.
I'd be supportive of this if I knew from small developers like Angela, if it could help more business operators like herself. I don't, and I haven't talked with Angela to know much what what her day-to-day concerns would be. So forgive me, Angela, if I'm speaking out of turn, but I'd be curious to know your opinion on this if you have one. She might not be available right now, which is fine.
Yeah, so Nate, let us think about that. I mean, essentially, it's a slightly different flavor of a horizontal density bonus.
Yeah. I mean, so basically, Nate, you're saying free
It's
land for the affordable developers.
affordable, and then an affordable developer that understands that business model comes in and develops in a horizontal mixed income project at that point. It's just the main developer isn't tied to that affordability when they
Right.
build
Yeah.
it or sell it.
Totally, much cleaner. And yeah, I back up what you say on the back end, the exit. Kind of what always spooks him. Yeah, the only guardrails, you would need to think about is it can't just be the crappy piece of dirt, that's
Right.
left over.
And it's got size site, like
Exactly.
if it's less than an acre, how valuable is it? Like, now you could still do some neat infill townhome affordable,
Yep.
but
Yeah.
yeah, it's not going to work in every instance.
Sliding scale type thing, and then the like someone's got to buy off and like, yep, this is good land, it's developable land, and I if it needs to be accessed through the main development's property, that's it it can't be undevelopable, and somehow there's got to be a litmus test for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely worth pursuing. I mean, that was helpful, Nate, when you kind of, I mean, I should have thought about that, but just the exit strategy piece of it, for the development that the affordability mixed in can complicate that. So that was helpful to understand that. So yeah, so this separates the two, so it makes it less messy. So yeah, I mean, it was a good idea.
Yeah, unfortunately, our clients think it's complicated enough and they really try to de-risk things, especially currently. So I'd love to find ways where more typical development projects could include affordability, and it's not just this small group that really executes a majority of it in Charlotte.
Yep.
Nate, this is Douglas. Can I ask a question? Just so I'll understand, you're saying then that the segment that's sliced off then goes to basically the city to be arbitraged to affordable developers.
Yes.
Is it valid that the affordable developers do that arbitrage as opposed to it coming to the city, and that we get this other organization that has their hands in this stuff all the time, basically being on the front line, and then we disintermediate the city?
Yeah, I think it could go either way. There could be an option where you just partner right off the bat with an affordable developer, but if in 5 years nothing happens, then the city takes control of the land. I mean, there could be a variety of conveyance methods, but yeah, that would be the ideal, is they find a partner day one.
Yeah, I could see a consortium of the affordable developers getting together, and that way they get first right of refusal or whatever you want to call it to these properties. And again, they would be there directly in the process, as opposed to the process goes to the city government then goes to the developer. So
Yeah.
I love the idea, and I think that I love markets. I love markets. So yeah, good
Yeah,
stuff.
there's probably a lot more to dive into it. A lot of nuance, but yeah, I think I'd agree there.
Okay. I know we're at time. We're about a minute over. Alan, can you just jump to the next slide real quick? Because I think what we're going to do is, or maybe the last slide we have. Or I don't know, Allison, is there anything on that one that you need to cover? You're good. Okay. So we've obviously been talking a lot about duplexes and triplexes still. There's still a lot of uh, things that need to kind of at least get parsed out and sorted through. So rather than spend time talking about this today, what I'd like to do is, and also since we don't have the full breadth of folks that we normally have from UAC on the call, we had some absences today, is send out an email with a little bit of homework assignment to maybe get us some feedback on this question about duplexes and triplexes, where they're maybe appropriate. Do we need to consider anything different? Do we need to consider corner lot provisions, things like that? So we'll put together a little bit of a structured kind of question there that we would like everybody to give us some responses to, give you all a good month or so, over the holidays to kind of think about it and provide some written responses. So we'll work to get that out to you over the next week, just to make sure that it's structured in a way that the questions make sense and prompt some good thought and discussion. And then we can revisit some of that when we reconvene at a future date. But still want to get some input and figure that may be the best way for us to do that, given that we're out of time here today. So keep an eye out for that. But outside of that, I don't have anything else to add. I appreciate everybody's time, taking some time out to talk through it, everything that we had today with everyone. I hope everybody has a great holiday season. And again, keep an eye out for an email with a little bit of follow-up assignment from us over the next week or so. So, but thank you again, everybody, for joining us today.
Yeah, bye.